Guys, thank you so much for tuning into this video. I really just wanted to do a review of a film that I've just seen. It's kind of been on my radar for a while, and it's been out for 2 decades now, so it's about time that I actually watched it, and it was showing as a late night screening on Film 4 one night. I watched it, and straight off the bat I just want to say I was completely blown away by it. I do think it's a bit of a classic, and that was just after my first watch of it. I've been aware of Lars von Trier's films before. I've seen Antichrist, which was just absolutely brutal. Melancholia, which admittedly I wasn't a huge fan of, but I do want to watch it again to give it a bit of another chance. And then you've got the Nymphomaniac films, volumes 1 and 2, which I watched in succession when it came out on Netflix, and they're pretty good as well. I think it's obviously it's a lot of time that you have to put aside to watch those films, but I think that's quite rewarding, and the ending of Nymphomaniac Volume 2 is just classic von Trier. I really want to see The House That Jack Built as well. I've heard some really interesting things about that film, and I haven't seen a lot of his old films. So this is the oldest of his films that I've seen, and it's Dancer in the Dark, starring Bjork. I just wanted to talk for a bit about the partnership between Bjork and Lars von Trier. There was a bit of controversy surrounding the film in terms of how von Trier treated Bjork on set. Apparently he was quite abusive, and in order to get her a performance out of her, which is a really tortured performance, I mean, if you've seen the film, Bjork is absolutely mesmerising in it, and is just an absolutely incredible character. And such a great on-screen presence. I mean, I already loved Bjork's music. What I've heard of it so far, my favourite album of hers is Vespertine, which I think is just an absolutely legendary album. It's hard to come across any other music that is more beautiful than that album. It really is just beauty, and how intimate the album is. It's a really must listen. If you haven't listened to it already, I'd really recommend going to listen to Vespertine, and I do think it's her best album to date. Of course, her debut album and Post are brilliant as well, and there's a lot of great experimental music that she's put out there, particularly up to the modern day. More and more bizarre music as she goes along, and that's brilliant. And I think as a person, in interviews, she's really charismatic and very soft-spoken, but gets her point across, and just a very fascinating person. The combination of that and Lars von Trier, who is also quite a fascinating person, perhaps on the more darker side of the spectrum. He does have a very nihilistic approach to things, as you can tell from if you've seen his films. Kind of the thing with Lars von Trier, it's kind of important to remember that he is, as Mark Kermode said, he is a bit of a prankster. He kind of likes to push people's buttons. He really is like a provocateur in filmmaking, his films. And I think that's really important to remember when you're going into a Lars von Trier film. You're probably going to be offended, and that's kind of what he's aiming to do a lot of the time. And I think that absolutely was the case with Antichrist. I think it's a great horror film, but it does also really want to push your buttons, and it does strive to do that. In the case of Dancer in the Dark, I don't think he is meaning going out straightforward to offend someone. I do think it's a very powerful, haunting film, and there are some really distressing scenes in there, particularly in the last half of the film. I've gone this far and I haven't actually explained the story of the film. So Bjork plays a Czechoslovakian person who's travelled to America on immigration and is working at this steel factory, and she's also living in an accommodation just next to a police officer's house, played by David Morse. Selma, who Bjork plays, is slowly going blind. She's made sort of quite clear early on in the story. She has a son who she's, without giving away any spoilers, she is trying to save up money for. And I think the most distressing scene of the film is quite early on, actually, when Bjork essentially has something stolen from her and she tries to get it back, and it's a really hard watch. It is a sequence that you kind of peek through your eyes a little bit because it's so disturbing and you don't quite know what's going to happen next, as is the case for the rest of the film. David Morse is fantastic in this film, and there's a lot of really good supporting performances from everyone. A particular shout out as well to Peter Stormare, who is just fantastic and is in probably my favourite musical sequence of the film as well. And that is something else about this film that's quite unique. It is essentially a musical, admittedly quite a cynical one in the overall tone of it and by the end, but the musical numbers themselves, the sequences, are actually, for the majority, quite joyous, and I really liked that about it. I wasn't expecting that from this film, and I think that all comes down to Bjork. Originally, Von Trier did want her to write the music as well, but Bjork insisted that Von Trier writes the lyrics of the songs and she just provides the music, and I think that works really well because it does combine their two artistic minds together and makes for something quite unique. I've not seen anything quite like this before, and it is really haunting. And like I say, the sequence that I talked about that I found particularly distressing, there is a musical sequence at the very end of that does lift the tension a bit. The way the musical sequences are filmed, it's almost done in this home video sort of style, very statically shot. Bjork doing her usual vibrant musical performance, but the way the cinematography is and the way the camera is positioned, it's just very cold, and I liked that juxtaposition there. I thought it was really interesting. It is ultimately a really heartbreaking film, and you do come out of it feeling exhausted because it does put you through the ringer. But overall, I think the bit that stood out for me was how Bjork's influence on the film provided some really joyous and happy moments. I just loved the musical aspect of it. And not regarding the musical aspect, Bjork is fantastic as a dramatic actor. I mean, she is just absolutely phenomenal, and in the very last sequence, which is again very harrowing, she gives it her all and she really does become Selma in this film. I'm going to give Dancer in the Dark a 5 out of 5. I absolutely loved this. Really, really powerful. I thought about it for days afterwards and think I want to seek out the soundtrack and listen to that again. So I would just say, if anyone's particularly sensitive to some hard-hitting drama and stuff and you don't really like that sort of thing, then I'd avoid this because it is really hard-hitting. There are some very emotionally distressing scenes in here. It is a really original piece of cinema, and I'd really, really highly recommend it if you can take it, if you can take some of the material. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this has been informative and enjoyable.